All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. Thank you for tuning in. If you are watching this live, or if you are watching the recording, we appreciate you giving us some of your time here. If you have watched the show before, you are familiar with what we're doing, and welcome back. If this is your first time watching our show, welcome. This is a live style Q&A show where we talk DFS, we talk SaberSim, we answer questions from our users live on stream here. We host this show every weekday, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And on Thursdays, this show is what we call a strategy session. So we've done 3 of those now. Yesterday, we had Max and Will on here talking a little League of Legends and CSGO esports DFS. So that recording, if you missed the show, is up on YouTube. I highly recommend checking it out. Last week, we did NBA Showdowns and short slates with all the playoff DFS going on right now. And the week prior to that, we did a sports betting special strategy session talking about some sports betting strategies. So those have been a big success so far. We've had a lot of engagement, a lot of questions, some interesting conversations. So I highly recommend checking those out if you are interested in esports DFS, NBA Showdowns or short slates, or sports betting. Next week, we are going to be looking at, on Wednesday instead of Thursday, doing a U.S. Open golf special strategy session. So highly recommend checking that out. More to come on what the official time will be on that. I think we are planning on doing that a little bit later than our normally scheduled office hours time. We may actually still do office hours that day as well. So stay tuned for more information on when that golf special U.S. Open strategy session is going to be. But yeah, we're here on office hours. So we take questions in through Slack. We take questions in through our YouTube chat. If you guys have any questions at all, just pop them right in here. You can also email us, support@sabersim.com. We've been getting some good questions coming in through email to tackle here on office hours. So any way you want to ask questions, feel free to shoot them out for us here. If you are a SaberSim subscriber and you are not already in our Slack, shoot us an email, support@sabersim.com. We'll get you an invite link to join the community. We have great discussions here going on every day. I am pretty amazed at just in general how sharp and smart some of the people in the community here are. We've had some interesting conversations about correlations in NBA, handling weather in baseball, all kinds of stuff. Just I've learned a lot. It's a great way to level up your game is to get in the community and talk to people. So let's see. We've got a couple questions in the queue today. Some interesting things to talk about here, but all things considered, it has been a little bit of a quiet 24 hours in terms of questions for office hours. So if you have been waiting to ask a question or just want to chat about something, or maybe don't even have a question totally, but you just kind of want to start a conversation, today's a good day to do that. We've got a full hour here to talk, and I've got a couple questions to jump into. So without much further ado, I will go ahead and get us started on our first question. This one came in through our support channel. Let me go ahead and pull up my screen here. Okay, cool. So this was a question about MLB cash games, actually. We've been talking a little bit of cash, I think, on Wednesday or Tuesday of this week. I'm not totally sure. We spent a long time talking about some cash game basic strategy here. But this question came in, and I can't remember. I should have had this pulled up. But the question was here about why am I still getting game stacks in cash lineups? And shouldn't I be trying to spread out my exposure in cash lineups? So I wanted to just go ahead and pull up a build here, run a cash build, talk about some things you might be seeing, and we'll go from there. So first off, something I wanted to mention, I didn't mention it in the last time we talked about cash games. But one way you can add a little bit of additional value to your cash game builds is instead of using the average projection, the average percentile, which is going to be a mean arithmetic average across all simulations of a player, it is a better idea in general to use the 50th, the median outcome for a player. And the reason why, first of all, what you're going to see, especially on the batter side, is you're going to see immediately all of your projections become even numbers. They become projections that a player could actually score in the game. So contrary to what we are looking at when we look at average projections here, where we're going to see these decimal points, right? Altuve can't actually go out and score 10.59 points. There's no game outcome where that happens. When we click the mean, or excuse me, that's the exact opposite of what I wanted to say. When we use the 50th percentile and use the median outcome, we're going to see this whole numbers. These are actual game outcomes that can happen. We're going to get the middle player outcome across their range of outcomes, right? So this is approximately probably 8. This is Altuve's, this is Altuve's middle outcome. What we do is we get a better, we avoid having a projection that is artificially inflated by a ceiling outcome, right? A player that hits a lot of home runs or something like that, but also strikes out a lot and has a pretty low floor, may have their mean projection, their average projection artificially increased because they can't score lower than 0, right? Their floor is kind of locked at that 0, but those higher percentage of ceiling outcomes can artificially raise a player's mean projection up and get you some players that are actually a little bit too volatile for what we're looking for in cash, right? So you'll get kind of flatter projections here. You'll get whole number projections. And this is true of pretty much any sport, right? It's a better idea for us to be looking at the median projection for building our cash build. So that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm going to run a build for cash. Let's see. Let's remove some stacking rules here. We don't want that. And just start with default cash, right? So when we're building cash builds, another thing to remember here is we not only want our sliders all pushed to the left because we're not as interested in the effects of correlation and ownership and smart diversity, right? We just want median projection optimal lineups. But it is also important to make sure you've selected this cash style. This will actually signal to the optimizer to use our cash builder, which is going to better build you those kinds of optimal lineups, right? We actually use a little bit of a different build logic for a GPP style contest than we do for a cash build. So we want to make sure we're picking cash. I'm going to set this to build 20 or so lineups to see the first 20 or so viable cash lineups and let this thing build here. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing. Give this just a moment here. Okay, so I did this ahead of time. And what we should in general see is a much less stacked lineup construction across all of our builds, right? We're still going to end up with these lineups where we have maybe 2 players from a team or even up to 3 players on a team in certain cases. But since we're not as interested in the effects of correlation on our cash lineups, right? We're not optimizing for upside. We just want the best plays across the board. You should, in general, see much flatter stacks, right? So we'll see 2 and 3-2 and things like that. And a lot of these lineups are going to be combinations of just the best plays on the board, right? This user that sent this question in particularly had a question about why am I still seeing like GPP style stacks in my build? So I would say if that is happening, a few things to look at, and I'm not sure what slate was particularly in question here. First of all, a good thing to look at that can happen, especially on maybe a smaller slate, if there is a team that has a spectacular, better hitting projection than other teams on the slate, right? So, I mean, we're looking at a 13-game slate where we have a lot of good hitting spots tonight, but there's nothing that stands out as being far and away the best hitting spot. But let's see, like Houston is 6-1, right? If our pool of teams was maybe just, let's say we were looking at a 4-game slate that was just this Atlanta-Miami game, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, Houston, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, right? In this particular case, it might be possible that you see a bigger stack of Houston for a cash game build just because the best hitting plays are all relegated to that stack, right? Another thing that you can look at too is compare things against our Vegas board that we pull up quite a bit here. If you are seeing a big stack in your cash builds, another thing to compare against would be looking at Vegas, right? And see if the field is going to assess the value in that game the same way. Thinking about that exact same example we did, let's say the slate was a little bit smaller. if we had Houston at 6.1 runs and Vegas had them at 5.0 runs, for example, you see they've got them pretty highly projected as well here too. But if they were much lower, that might be a good indication to pull that projection down a little bit, like we talked about in our last cash game video here, and get a little bit closer to the field to avoid some of that stacking. I would say from there, again, if you are still getting some stacks in your cash game builds, and you want to avoid that, right? Those plays stacked up are going to be correlated, which means even if they fail, they're all more likely to fail. You can use a manual stacking rule to actually prevent that from happening, right? So if we wanted to say, you know what, I'm getting 5-man stacks in my cash builds and I don't know why, and I don't like it, even though our optimizer might be saying those are the best plays. One thing you could do also is to set a no more than rule here and say, don't give me more than 3 players from the same team. You could even say 2, right? I would be careful with this because you are going to potentially limit yourself from a situation where the best plays are all on one of those games, right? And you're going to see some of the top cash players recognize that, right? We're not necessarily running away from stacks, right? We don't want to necessarily say only one player from every team on the slate, because we do have these viable cash lineups where, let's pull this back up, and let's look at a team where we have 3. Hang on a second. So we've got a viable cash lineup here that is a 3-way angel stack. You know, we maybe don't necessarily want to run away from doing these stacks, but you can prevent it with these stacking rules. So if we wanted to say, even if we wanted to say no more than 2 players from the same team, right? We could then rebuild our cash lineups and we would know we wouldn't get any of those 3 stacks. So I just really kind of thinking about this in summary here, I would be frankly a little surprised to see anything with like a typical bigger slate, which are the slates we want to target for cash anyway, where you are running these builds and getting big 5-man stacks. So you can see here, we're only getting now 2 players on any given team within our lineups. I would be a little surprised running this on anything larger than like a 6 or so game slate and seeing big 4 or 5-man stacks in your cash builds. If you are getting that, I would double check a few things. I would first make sure that you are using the cash builder with all of your sliders set far to the left. I would say from there, if you are getting one team that's showing up a lot more than others, check both our team total projections to see if there's one team that's well over projected. And if there is, compare that to what Vegas thinks about that team, and maybe make some adjustments from there. And if you really just want to avoid the effects of correlation completely, and aggressively kind of fade any correlative elements in your cash build lineups, you can set a manual stacking rule to avoid that. So I think that question was from Andy in our support channel. So Andy, I'll send you the recording here. I don't know if you're watching this live, but if you're not, I'll make sure you get a copy of the recording here, and let me know if you have any follow-up questions there. So good question. All right, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and move us along to the next one here. This one was from Phantom, and it came in our Office Hours Slack channel. He said, might be interesting to go over PGA Showdown strategy and ways to utilize SaberSim to get an edge. Also, how to narrow down the player pool. I'll say a few things here first. I did link a video in our Office Hours Slack. Max, I think earlier this season, or maybe closer to the golf season's got all messed up because of COVID, but I think this was like at the start of when everything came back after COVID. Max did this video called The 6 Secrets of PGA Round 4 Showdowns on DraftKings. It's a really strong video. The Round 4 Showdowns in particular, you can find some additional edge because final position on the leaderboard actually affects the scoring, right? So like on a round 2 showdown or something like that, how the players are positioned at the end of round 2 doesn't actually impact the scoring. It's just what the golfers do that day. But on round 4, you know, the player that finishes first in the tournament actually ends up getting that first place bonus, and second and third One thing that he talks about in particular in that video that is it's important to remember, and it's why smart diversity is so valuable, is that obviously only one player can come in first. One player can come in second, one player can come in third. So you will often see basic projections are going to account for every individual player's first place equity. So let's look at this a little bit here. And let's just say that today was kind of the final day of the tournament. And we'll pull up the round 2 projections here. I'm going to try to not just sit here and summarize that video because anyone can go back and watch it, and it's a great video. But any player's individual projection accounts for basically their win equity, right? So again, we're using the example as if this was round 4. Dustin Johnson's projection has it's a mean average, right? That includes the simulations where he wins first place, right? And that's some percentage of his simulations. And the same thing with Brooks, right? But in reality, at the end of the tournament, only one of these players is going to come in first, and then somebody else is going to come in second, which means they have a slightly lower ceiling, right? They can't score the first place points, which accounts for a large percentage of those points in round 4. And what's really useful about the way we handle smart diversity is on very high or at 10, you're actually going to be capturing those tournament simulations, those round simulations. So when we build lineups, the lineups are going to be built in a way that makes sense, right? You're going to get probably the player that is maybe in that simulation finishing first. And the player that finishes second, right, is going to, that's an actual real tournament simulation. So if you get a lineup when you're running a showdown build and you get a lineup that has both Dustin Johnson and Brooks in it or something like that, what the builder is saying is we ran a certain simulation, probably where one of those players finished first and one of those players finished second in the tournament. And they built a viable lineup, right? They got enough value out of their salary, even in that situation, to make a productive lineup. And I guess really kind of backtracking here, what's really more likely to happen is you're probably unlikely to see a lot of those lineups, right? Because someone like both of those two players are unlikely to both be strong plays in the same lineup, given that only one can win. So I guess really, here I am. I said I didn't want to sit here and summarize this video and probably do it worse than Max did, and now that's what I'm getting into. So I would definitely say go back and watch that video. A few other things, I guess, on PGA Showdown that we can talk about. So first of all, especially outside of those round 4s where we don't have finished position playing a role, and we're really just talking about what those players do that day. These contests can be very variant, similar to what we were talking about with some of the NBA Showdown stuff. The edge is going to be a little bit smaller on just round 1, 2, and 3 PGA Showdowns. I would say especially on round 1 before any of the golfers have actually gone out. If you're looking for a little bit of a sweat, they can be a lot of fun. I play a lot of PGA Showdowns, but this is something where our edge is going to be a little bit smaller. But I can talk about a few things that you can do to kind of push that edge a little bit. So one resource I really like, they've got a lot of great stuff for golf DFS, is Data Golf. And they have a lot of their information is, and I think actually Max talks about this a lot too, the way he uses this site. They have a lot of free information on their site. They do have a paywall for some of the information. Pretty good subscription at a pretty reasonable price. So I like their stuff a lot, but they do have a lot of information that is still available free. And one of those things that is very useful is under Scratch Tools. If you look at fantasy projections, a lot of this is going to be, again, behind a paywall here. But what they are going to give you for free is a wave split recommendation. And basically, they're going to look at the weather and account overall for tee times, right? So they're basically saying the advantage for golfers golfing this morning, on Friday morning, was roughly a half stroke advantage and roughly accounting for 2.1 DraftKings showdown points, right? And you can actually click this little hourly forecast thing, and it will kind of show you why, right? The wind was expected to ramp up this afternoon. I believe it has. So they were expecting golfers golfing earlier in the morning had roughly a 2.1 showdown point advantage, right? That's one way we can get a little bit of an edge here. I know we don't, unfortunately, have tee times listed here. I've heard from a few users that that would be useful. I can definitely see why. And right now, you're going to have to come up with another source to find tee times. So I think PGA Tour leaderboard, I think this is probably one of the best resources for it. Let me see. Tee times, yeah. So one thing you can do, this isn't the most helpful view here, and someone might be able to point me in a direction where this maybe is, there's actually a little bit more useful information here, but you can bump up projections on players that are teeing off in the morning. So a good way to do this, say you wanted to prioritize some of these early golfers, is to just start grabbing some of these guys and bumping up their projections. And they'll even tell you down to the point how much to bump them by. So this is something that I actually kind of end up actually doing in my process when I'm looking at PGA Showdown lineups, is I will actually bump these guys up according to their tee times. And that's a good way to get some edge. A lot of folks aren't really looking at weather as much when they're setting their Showdown lineups. And what's also really nice about this is I feel like you end up with two groups of people where there's a bunch of people playing PGA Showdown that really don't even look at this at all, that aren't even interested in weather. And then there's a bunch of people that are going to be going a little bit overboard with this, right? Like people will say, okay, weather's the way we get our edge in our PGA Showdown lineups. So I'm going to build only morning golfer 6-man stacks every lineup, right? And this ends up creating a really moderate approach to handling your showdown lineups, because 2.1 points is, I mean, it's rather significant. It has an impact. It should not be the only variable you're thinking about, but it's useful, right? And they'll actually quantify this at just how useful it is. So that is a very good way to get an edge, right? Another thing that's really useful, they also offer this for free, is under interactives on live tournament stats. They're going to break down the field in terms of where every golfer in the field is gaining strokes on each round or as the whole event. So this is something else that Max talks about. He probably does it in a more articulate way than I will here. But off the tee, strokes gained and strokes gained on approach. This is kind of true of golf DFS in general. Probably more true on a more macro scale rather than the micro scale of looking at single rounds of a tournament. But in general, off the tee, strokes gained and on approach, strokes gained are a little bit more consistent. They're a little bit more predictive. They're a little less noisy than something like strokes gained putting, right? The strength of the putter kind of comes and goes a little bit quicker than a golfer's skill off the tee, right? So another thing you can do in terms of thinking about players that you have maybe some edge in rostering, or at least something I like to do, is I like to look at players that are hitting the ball well off the tee that I think the field might undervalue because of some other component of their game isn't there, typically their putter, right? Or maybe they're a little bit lower on the leaderboard and it doesn't tell the whole story, right? So, I mean, a player that really immediately pops to me here is Brooks, right? He shot +3. Let's see. Okay, so again, I mean, we're doing this in hindsight here. So I realize I'm going to say something that probably wouldn't have worked out, but this is the name of the game with PGA Showdowns, right? Let's look at round one, actually. Let's go back to round one. So players that I'm looking at are guys that are maybe hitting the ball well off the tee, but aren't putting very well, with the hope that maybe that putter comes alive a little bit in the next round and they keep hitting the ball well, right? So it's a weak field this week. These aren't some of the most exciting golfers I've ever seen. But you can find guys here that maybe had a bad round one, that struggled putting, but hit the ball well, that the field is likely to undervalue. I think Alex Noren maybe is a good example. He actually had a bad approach, though, so that's not great. And he was positive with the putter. Tyrrell Hatton's another one, right? round one. I mean, he still shot -3, but wasn't really doing well with the putter. Hit the ball well off the tee. Might be somebody that is likely to maybe have a little bit more positive variance on the next day, right? So again, golf is variant enough when you play 4 days in a row across the whole tournament. PGA Showdowns are tough. They are hyper variant. But that's another thing that you can look at in terms of the way you're putting together your player pool is, I think, bumping some projections up based on tee times, and then looking for guys that are going to maybe have a little bit of positive variance come their way with the putter on the next day. And then from there, what I recommend is when you're actually looking at your build, this is actually just like literally how I do my process. What I like to do, I think we offer ownership projections here for PGA Showdown. This is, again, a very difficult thing to predict how the field is going to react. So what I typically do is I actually like to turn my ownership fade off for my actual initial build. And I will crank smart diversity all the way up. One, to counteract that a little bit, to get a little bit more natural variance, to get a little further away from the field. And I will then run my build. So this would be after I might have made any tee time adjustments. And I like to just kind of see what we're getting, what the model likes out of the gate. And I will make my individual adjustments based on kind of what I'm seeing in the strokes gained data here. And this gets better. I think if you're thinking about where you can find an actual edge and where you can push an edge in PGA Showdowns, I think your best bet is going to be in those round 4 showdowns, because you're going to get the advantage of having that final positional scoring, right? Which is a place where smart diversity can really, here, I think we got slammed up here a little bit. Let's see. Try another build. You get the advantage of having that positional scoring at the end of the tournament, and you also have the advantage of a full 3 days of data to work from, right? Let's see. Okay, now we're working. Let this build here, and I'll kind of finish some of my last thoughts here. So you can see then what I will start doing is typically just looking at some of the golfers I'm getting a lot of and just seeing how the tournament's going for them so far, and kind of adjusting from there. So we have a lot of Poulter, and if I was setting these lineups, I might be interested in just looking. So he's a guy that, you know, it looks like, I mean, he -2 in round 1, shooting pretty well off the tee. I'll start just looking through guys here and seeing what some of my most exposed golfers look like. And you're going to see a lot of these guys that are going to come up at the top are generally going to be doing pretty well. What I will do from there is then potentially start to look at some targets of guys that I just want to take shots on, right? So like, I wouldn't even be afraid of a guy like this, right? I don't know what Charlie Belgian's game is like at all, but he hit the ball well in round 1 off the tee. He had a terrible day putting and around the green. I'll take a shot on a guy like that sometimes and just push them into a few lineups, right? So you can see, like, no one's going to roster this guy, but you get a little bit of access to him. And lineups exist with this player in the pool, right? It's that variant. When we build 500 lineups, you're going to have some lineups with everyone. McCumber is another guy. I actually played a lot of McCumber in general in this tournament, and he's probably going to miss the cut, but that's another guy that maybe I want a little bit more. So I would say really, like, have some fun with this too. These are super variant contests. If you're not having a little fun with it and taking some shots, you're probably just going to lose to the rake over the time, and you might anyway. I think a lot of the edge on PGA Showdown is captured in that round 4 showdown, but those are some of the things I like to do from there. So another thing, I guess, last note on this is, like, look out for guys that are you can do this the other way around, right? Is look for guys that gained a ton of strokes putting, maybe in particular compared to their off the tee. So, like, I think Van Ruyen actually had another really nice round today. Yeah, he had a great round today. But looking at this as if it was yesterday is guys, look for guys that are putted really well and maybe had some kind of fortunate variance with the putter on that first day, and maybe didn't hit the ball as well off the tee as opportunities to fade. A lot of players, I think, when they're setting their PGA Showdown lineups, will just look at the leaderboard and start sticking in cheap value guys that maybe had a really good round one or have been doing well to the tournament so far. So like a guy like Taylor Vaughn stands out. He was minus, what was he in round one? He must have been -4, right? Looks like he's still -1 today, so doing okay today. And you can find those opportunities for fades. So we're fading him already. But let's see. Van Ruyen actually would have been an interesting target as well. Like someone like gained over 4.5 strokes putting on the first day. I think it's unlikely to happen again. Where's he at right now? He had another, so he shot even today. Probably did pretty well, but you can see like a lot of this variance came back now to bite him. So those are some of my strategies. Very variant contests, right? Single round golf contests, especially in rounds 1, 2, and 3, especially round 1 before you won't even have some of this data, are super variant. So have some fun with it. What I would say is crank your smart diversity, pay attention to tee times, and look at some of the strokes gain stats to see what might happen, where some variance might hit players, and where they won't. So on the subject of golf, before I kind of move on here, we'll probably talk about this a little bit more next week as well in that strategy session for the US Open. Contests are just enormous. So not only the full tournament contest, but I think the showdowns every single day are just huge. So if you are interested in a little bit more golf conversation, definitely check us out for the strategy session next week. I think we're shooting for Wednesday on that. So sweet. And then last note, before I move on, please watch that video. It's linked in the Office Hours channel, 6 Secrets of PGA for Round 4 Showdowns on DraftKings. A lot of what I'm talking about here, I just literally got directly from Max. It's a really sharp video that he put together. I think he's probably a little bit more articulate here walking through some of this stuff, and definitely sharper than I am with some of these contests. So please go check that video out if you're interested in PGA Showdown. We did get a question through YouTube here from Chase. Let's take a look at this. Would changing the sliders to a more extreme setting like to 10s on Smart D and correlation, but 0 on ownership fade be an okay strategy? Chase, are you talking, I'm assuming we're not talking golf here anymore. I'm assuming we're talking baseball. Thinking about correlation. Let's see here. So I would say, we talked a little bit about what the value of these builds where you have, hang on, let's reset some of this stuff. We talked a little bit earlier this week about the value of some of these builds that you can get where you actually do turn ownership fade all the way down and smart diversity all the way up. And then maybe say, here, let's actually go ahead. And let's say we're doing, yeah, we'll do 150. We'll do that. I'm going to leave correlation where it is. And one thing I think that can be very useful about running these build types is it's going to show you an ownership agnostic build, basically, a build that doesn't care about ownership, showing all of these different viable lineup construction options, right? And you can use that here to then influence to what extent you think you need to get away from the chalk by looking at something like Vegas or our ownership projections and just seeing where chalk is going to lie. So we'll let this run for a second, and then we can talk about it a little bit more. I would say correlation is probably the slider that in general I am the least likely to touch at all. I find that it's in a pretty good spot overall. I think if you maxed it out to 10, you're probably just going to see a little bit more 5-3 stacks comparatively. Those stack types might come up a little bit. If you want to play super correlative lineups and maximize the upside there, I think that's fine. I personally just don't really touch the correlation slider that much. I think it's in a pretty good spot with the defaults. But this is definitely an interesting idea of kind of opening up smart diversity, turning ownership fade down to 0, and just letting it build. So I'll let this finish here, and we'll talk a little bit about how I might use a build like this. I would say, personally, my process, I'm more likely to do this for the purpose of research or education on the slate than I am to do it for my final build. But give this one more second here. I want a really big pool because I think that's how this is the most useful. All right, so this is now wrapping up. Oh, I did this on median projection. That's okay for the purpose of just showing this off. That's not exactly what I intended, but that's okay. Oh man, I don't really want that like that. That's fine. For the purpose of just showing it, we'll talk about it. So what this is really doing, right? We basically told the builder to build us 150, actually really 1,500 lineups. Maybe we'll just look at the whole pool, right? We're looking at this entire pool of 1,500 lineups where it's picking out single game samples, single game simulations, right? To determine the projections of each player, turning ownership off, not caring about ownership at all, and getting an idea of where the best plays are on the slate, right? Let's actually go ahead. I'm not going to look at the whole pool because we're going to get some lineups that aren't so viable there. And you can get an idea of where the builder thinks where the builder thinks players are going to go, where they think lineups are going to be made from. And you can see on tonight, actually, we're seeing a very flat team stacks. I think we did this the other day and we were getting like Houston 50 or 60% owned stacks on pitchers. We're seeing definitely a lot of DeGrom, really just kind of DeGrom and then splitting up some of these other aces and then a ton of different value options, right? And this is going to kind of start to show you like where the builder thinks opportunities are. And then you can compare that to our ownership projections for those teams or back to Vegas, right? This is actually how I like to do it when I'm just doing some of my initial research is looking at Vegas. And I'll actually do this first a lot of times is I'll go through and I'll be like, okay, I think players are going to play Red Sox. I think they're going to play Reds. I think they're going to play Astros. There's some actually really high totals tonight. So yeah, Reds, Astros, Cleveland a little bit, Dodgers, Cubs. And I go back here and start looking at what kind of teams I'm seeing. And I'm seeing different teams, right? Twins, that's a different one. Toronto, definitely some Houston, Seattle, Angels, right? These are teams that I maybe didn't really expect to see here. And this can kind of influence how much ownership fade you want to use. So maybe in this particular case, then you don't all of a sudden really actually want as much ownership fade. I think there's actually probably GPP viable lineups here that are in this pool already with these settings. So maybe you don't need to pull up ownership fade as high. It's also a good situation of like, I think on smaller slates in particular, we get a lot of questions from users that where there's like a very chalky team or a chalky pitcher or some super chalk on some four game slate or something like that. And we'll get questions that are say like, why are we fading this guy? Right? They're a run and a half higher than every other team on the slate, or he's the best pitcher in the game. Right? I had a question that came in through support a couple weeks ago. I think it was like a 4-game early slate where Garrett Cole was on the mound and all the other pitchers were kind of trash. And when you ran the lineups on default settings, you got no Garrett Cole, right? And we had a question come in like, where's Garrett Cole? Why are we not getting any? When you run a build like this, it'll kind of show you agnostic to ownership, how viable the builder thinks that player is. And then you can kind of determine how much you want to fade the chalk from there. So for example, let's actually just now for the purpose of doing this here, let's run a default build. And actually let me fix my percentiles. Oh, I can do that from here. Let me go back real quick. I can change this now to average. I'm curious if this changes anything dramatically. I think we are going to see more Houston. The median projection, the median percentile is going to cause you to get a much more flatter roster construction or a much more flatter exposures in general because players' medians condense a lot more than their mean projections. Let's look. Let's see if this changes anything, switching to average. It might a little bit. Probably not too much. My computer's being a little slow on me today here. So it didn't really change too much. We are getting now more Houston, right? So that's a little bit more in line with what Vegas is likely to do. But Seattle is a team that now all of a sudden is popping a little bit more, and I don't think anyone's looking to play a lot of Seattle. 4.1, right? So that's already a place that SaberSim is going to be pretty different. This is definitely on my local machine today. It's been slow all day. So, yeah, no, I mean, we're still getting a lot of Twins. We're still getting a lot of Toronto. So not a huge, it went back. Whatever. Let's run another build now. I'll leave this one. And let's go look at, let's change this back to average. I'm going to adjust 2 players' projections here slightly just so we don't see that message. I'm going to let it run another 150 too, so we're comparing apples to apples. And now this is our default, right? So ownership fade comes up to moderate, smart diversity comes down to 8, and we can kind of see a little bit maybe differently what we're getting here now that we have some impacts of ownership on our build. And with ownership fade at 3, smart diversity just coming down a little bit, I don't think this is going to be dramatically different, but it does provide some context to what you might be seeing in your test builds, and why SaberSim is doing certain things that it is. So we'll let this run for a moment. Don't see any other questions having come in yet, so I'm kind of fine sticking on this topic for a little while. If you have questions, you're watching this, there's something you've been meaning to ask, pop it into a YouTube chat or pop it into our Office Hours channel on Slack here. I'd be happy to get to it. Have some time here before the end of the show. Austin said in YouTube chat, so glad I limited Brooks to 30% this week. I full faded. So feeling pretty good about that so far, but I don't even know if I'm going to have a single 6 out of 6 lineup. I don't even know like how many people are. I was looking at cut sweats yesterday and it had, I think it was like 1% of lineups in the large field GPPs were expected to have 6 of 6. So if you got one, you're probably going to be way out in front of the field. I don't think I have any, and I'm still, obviously it's not, cut hasn't even happened yet, but I'm still looking pretty good. Varner was the guy. The chalk I ate this week was Harold Varner. Finished like +5, so that one kind of killed me. But also said, damn, that's smart. Thanks for showing that. I think probably when I was looking at the strokes gained tool, and I don't deserve the credit for that. That Max taught me that via that video. I've kind of added maybe a little bit of a spin on just some things that the way I like to play, but that's all Max. So you can see like almost not really a lot of difference here in terms of the stack types we're getting, right? Does it affect pitching at all? Not really, right? Not a dramatic change here between those two builds. So the higher ownership fade goes, the more impact you're going to get from turning it off. But it is a very useful research tool to run that kind of build. And it'll show you, especially to draw a parallel between a default settings test build and then a 0 ownership fade and 100 smart diversity or a 10 smart diversity build, to see where SaberSim is starting to make some decisions for you based around ownership. So on a much smaller slate, you'll get a bigger impact of this. So honestly, I haven't seen any other questions come in here, so I'm just going to keep rolling on this topic. Let's look at it on a smaller slate, like the 3-gamer here on the night slate. So let's first go ahead and see. So ownership fade is going to be a little bit higher. Let's see. So we turn ownership fade down. We have smart diversity still. Let's go ahead and let's just build 20 for the sake of time here instead. Okay, so we're going to turn ownership fade off. We're going to build 20. I'm going to adjust a projection here. So these are, again, we're basically just looking at what does SaberSim think are viable GPP lineups apart from ownership, if there was no ownership concerns at all on this little 3-gamer. We'll let this build for a second. This is another thing too where, well, I guess I'll let this build here. So all Dodgers, all Angels, right? That's what SaberSim pretty much wants to do out of the gate. And we can see if all of a sudden you tell it, okay, but now consider the impacts of ownership. What do you want to do? We'll run this one too. See a couple other questions coming in here. So I will, we'll take a look at this real quick. We'll wrap up this thought and then we'll look at some of these questions that have just trickled in here. So we saw Dodgers and Angels for this little 3-gamer on the night slate, right? Ownership agnostic. And then we turn ownership back on. We take another look. So really the same two teams for the most part, but we start to see some Arizona creep up a little bit. 50% of our stacks are Arizona. On pitching, we're still getting a lot of Kershaw, which is obviously going to be the chalkiest guy on the night slate. So you can see like what SaberSim has kind of decided here now with ownership back on is that it's going to drop a little bit. It looks like really it's sacrificed mostly some Dodgers to get some more Arizona stacks. If we were looking at maybe what the field is going to do, let's see. I completely forgot about this game. I just realized it. I entered Showdowns for this, and I like literally just did not set lineups. I completely forgot there was a day game today. That's a shame. That happens. Anyway, you can see. So like obviously what the field is going to do is probably stick to Dodgers and Angels. So, you know, pulling in some Diamondback stacks is going to be a way to get a little different, and you can see the impacts there. So anyway, then let's see. So Chase said, so a couple days ago on a small MLB slate when Brian O'Grady was the highest value play, I lowered him because he didn't seem to be doing much in the minors and was called up the first time. So I lowered him and he ended up being the best value on the slate. Just wondering what I missed. I'll say a couple things on this. One, you can drive yourself crazy individually, like looking at a particular player, making an adjustment, seeing what happens in one baseball game, and then trying to, you know, if he does well, like, oh, what did I miss? What was I not accounting for? Or vice versa, right? If you bump a player up and he goes 0 for 4, like baseball, all sports really, when you look down to a single game sample, are going to have so much variance that you probably need to give yourself a little bit more time on your process of making adjustments before you determine that you're doing something right or wrong. So I wouldn't necessarily like go searching to try to figure out what you weren't seeing by making an adjustment. I would ask yourself, like, what really was your process for doing that? So it looks like here, I mean, I think maybe that's a sound process of looking at a player that just got called up and maybe saying, especially, I think he was probably pretty chalky that day, maybe saying you want to fade instead there. I think that's totally fine. And it's better to judge your process over a longer period of time and see if it's working. I will say, I mentioned it before, we do account for that kind of thing in the model. So we actually, we had Will on yesterday talking about his CSGO model, but one of the things he's helped us out with too is actually creating a minor league model. So when players do get called up, their success or lack thereof in the minors is kind of taken into consideration, with how we project them playing in the majors. I don't think there are a lot of other models out there that are doing that in a way that is sophisticated as what we have. So I would say it's a double-sided coin here, really, because just the other day I was saying, you know, a really good opportunity to make adjustments to the projections is to move players around that there is less overall data on, like minor league players and things like that. I think that's still a good approach, but it is worth noting that we do kind of take that into account a little bit in our model. So, I mean, honestly, Chase, I don't think you did anything wrong here. I don't think you necessarily missed anything. I think taking a stand on a player that there's not a lot of historical data on is a really sound approach. And I would say probably keep an eye on adjustments you are making over a longer term time frame here and see if they are paying off. And that would probably be my approach there. So let's see. Andrew mentioned here, what are your thoughts on amateur DFS players taking shots at the live champion series events? Been playing the satellites. I have been playing a lot of those satellites too, like the satellites to get you into the qualifier. Just mostly for fun. I think you can normally get in them for like, I think that right now there's a lot of satellites out there for the $13 qualifier that is supposed to take place before the end of the season here, which is then the qualifier to the live championship series. I think they're fun. I think those contests overlay a lot. So I think one thing that you can really look for is joining those satellites when they're not going to fill, especially close to lock. There can be a ton of edge there just because, DraftKings is assuming there might be 80 people in that contest, and sometimes it only fills like 40 or 50%, especially when they keep opening them. Sometimes they'll open a new contest right before lock, and it's just very unlikely to fill, and you can get some definite edge there. I would say make sure it fits into your overall bankroll strategy. I would not be overplaying satellites at the expense of other typical GPP type contests. I think the qualifiers in general can be very hard to win. There was I wonder if there was a Twitter account, I can't remember his name, for a while that was tracking these. So he was like tracking actually what like the pros success rates were at playing qualifiers over the course of the season. And you can really dump a lot of money away in those. So I think as a part of your bankroll strategy, my doorbell just rang. As a part of your overall bankroll strategy, playing well overlaid satellites, or just not committing too much of your bankroll to satellites, to qualifiers, can be fun. It can be a way to get a shot at playing in some of those other contests that maybe your bankroll otherwise wouldn't really allow you to get to. Even like I personally am certainly not going to be playing $13 live championship qualifiers just out of my bankroll. I like playing some of those satellites and getting tickets and getting access that way. So I think it's totally fine. Especially on like smaller, like showdown slates, like the one I missed. I still cannot believe it's been a while since I just straight up missed a lock. But I was busy here before the show. I just totally forgot about that day game. But no, like playing some of the smaller slates, the night slates, the turbos, the showdowns, there are satellites there that don't fill that can get you into some of those bigger tournaments, and they can be a lot of fun. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I definitely would say make sure it fits within your bankroll. Yeah, Andrew said I saw Awesemo already won like 4. I think what would be really, I don't even know where you find this information, but I'd be curious how much he invested to win those 4, because there's like normally 1 ticket or whatever at the top. They're expensive contests to play. They're very hard to win. So a lot of the pros and sharks invest a lot into the actual qualifier contests. So, but I know we've had some SaberSim users get a chance at those live finals before. I'm sure some of them have got in through the satellite chain. I do think that satellites in general can be a really interesting thing to add into your bankroll if it makes sense. And again, if you are treating it as a fraction, as a smaller component of your overall contest selection mix. But you'll see here, I'll just pull up kind of like what my contest selection looks like for the main slate. Let's see. Because I definitely am playing these. I play a lot of them. So I'm sticking a lot to the smaller dollar stuff, but you'll see I've been hitting these satellites pretty hard. And I think they overlay a lot. So I've been playing a lot of the ones to the golf. I've been playing a lot of them to the Best Ball Millionaire. There is this, I don't think they have it on the main slates, but they do have it's a satellite to a $13 qualifier to the live final, which I've racked up a few tickets for, which can be kind of fun. So, yeah, no, I think that's totally fine and as a part of your contest mix. So. All right. Don't see any other questions that have come in. Man, I am bummed about missing that lock. I can't believe that happened. It happens to everybody at some point. I feel like that's just like anyone that has played DFS for a little while can just relate to just completely just whiffing it, or something comes up or the internet goes down and you just end up with a bunch of. This is also why I preach this all the time. Always, never reserve your entries. Always put lineups in. I know we say it in all of our content, and then here I am. I have reserved entries in the day showdown slate. But man, that is always just, it hits you right here, right in your heart when you have one of those missed locks come by. And this is just like a little kind of meaningless day baseball game showdown slate that I missed. So what a shame. But Chase said I've slept through so many locks accidentally. Yeah, it happens, man. I feel like everyone's had their own like horror story or random thing that caused them to miss lock. I remember since we've got a couple minutes here heading into the weekend, but there was a MMA slate a few weeks ago where my internet went down like minutes before lock, and I don't have very good cell service here, so I was sitting like perched up on this chair I've got over here that's close to the window, which is the one spot in my condo where I have actually pretty good data, trying to get these lineups in at the last second. And my CSV, I got it up, ended up splitting directly in half. So I had like 75 valid lineups and then 75 just reserved dud entries. I got half of it in like with seconds to spare, but that still hurt throwing away 75 entries like that. So anyway, no one needs to hear me talk too long and whine about old missed locks, but yeah, I think that's about it here. If there's no other questions, I think we'll cut it off there. We'll be back again Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern here, back for another episode of Office Hours. If you have any questions for me over the course of the weekend, feel free to pop them in the Office Hours channel on Slack. We'll get to them on Monday. If you're watching the recording back, or if you're not in Slack, you can also email us, support@sabersim.com. If you want a question particularly answered on Office Hours, you can always mention that in the email. If it's not there, a lot of times I'll go through and pick out some of my favorites that are in that email inbox to talk about, just like we did today. So otherwise, we will see you guys on Monday. Good luck with any of your contests tonight or this weekend, and we'll see you guys on Monday. All right.